Atamarie nā tangata aroha nā here. Whakawhiti ki a koe Tāne Tree Trust, rua ko Pure Advantage, Peter and Simon. Mo te whai wahi ki te korero tahi. So I really appreciate the fact that you guys have put in the effort to bring us together to have a talk, because if we don't talk together, we're going to talk past each other. So I really appreciate that. I'm not going to talk about who Forest Owners Association are. You can find us on the website if you want to. Suffice to say, we've got a broad membership ranging from Fonterra through the New Zealand Super Fund, big ones, small ones. We're not in the business of stealing land or children. So actually, I'll just go back a couple. I'll start off with, how do I go back? Red? Followers of Tāne, loyal disciples, patient sufferers, I say unto you that your time is at hand. For the son of Noah, this isn't going to work, is it? The son of Noah has spoken, and verily he hath said that there shall be a proliferation of trees upon the land, upon the surface of the earth. And there will be trees where there were no trees. And the trees shall come in pairs, and they shall be called the native, and they shall be called the exotic. In the past, the people had not the word, and there was policy darkness upon the land. The policy makers knew not what to develop, and the investors and the landowners knew not what or whether to plant. And trees were lost from the land. But the prophet has created targets, and he has created budgets, and the government has looked upon these and has seen that they make sense, and has said, well done, Rod, my son, it shall be so. And so the exotics have gone forth and multiplied, because the ETS has given unto their owners their daily credits, as they shall give those credits unto others. But the natives have yet to multiply, for the native tree is tricky, and the native tree is vulnerable. And the native tree, quite frankly, is bloody expensive to rear and plant and maintain. And the credits accumulate slowly. So we ask ourselves, how shall we have a proliferation of natives upon the land? Well, one of the first things I'd say, and I think others have alluded to it as well, and more than alluded to it, is try not to see plantation as an enemy. I think the minister said it, we need lots of trees, and I think we have estates here that can be mutually supportive. They both have a role to play, and I would actually argue that neither of them can do the role of the other. So they are quite unique roles. We do need both. The minister talked about the shortfall. Even if we do what we said we're going to do or what we're trying to do, we've still got a big shortfall that we're somehow going to have to make up. There's been a lot of talk about offsetting, and I'll put up some comments shortly, but I would say that offsetting is legitimate. Yes, I know there are. It has some real concerns offshore. There are things being counted as offsetting, such as deforestation avoided, which I would agree should not be in the category of offsetting. And we do have plantation forestry replacing native forestry, which is also something that we don't want. So in that sense, yes, there are some valid concerns about offsetting, but under our nationally determined approach, it is quite legitimate to be using offsetting. And I would say that that fourth bullet point there, this is about recognising that just because you're seeing a pine tree go onto the land doesn't mean to say that it could have been a native. As I said before, we need both, and to stop or try to prevent the pines doing their job is not actually going to enhance the natives doing theirs. So to me, it's a kind of wasted effort when we can be working together. We do need to plant what's needed. As I said before, we need both. I would certainly agree we don't need more than what is prescribed. So yes, indeed, we do not need sequestration, removing gross emissions reductions or taking the place of gross emissions reductions. Absolutely need to keep the hammer to the pedal on that one, the foot to the pedal. So TK talked about some comments, didn't attribute them. I'm going a little bit further and I am attributing these to pure advantage. I don't want to dwell on the negative, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but these are the sorts of things that I think are unhelpful. We don't need to try to solve this problem in the next 20 years. Well, we do, actually. Pre-1990s, an imaginary line in the sand? Sure. What are we going to do, argue with international rules? And there's a bunch of other stuff up there as well. But as I say, I'm going to focus on the positive. So I'll move on. Well, my message there is, again, let's just try to work on how we can get natives expanded and looked after better, rather than having a crack at something else which seems to be doing a bit better at the moment. So this is effectively where we're at. That dotted line up there is, or just beyond that, is where we've got to. Where we've come from actually hasn't been a happy place. We've had a lot of deforestation going on prior to that dotted line, and that those green and brown, actually I've got a little thingy here on my belt that I prepared earlier. And there we go. So those two lines up there, there's the effort from the native, there's the effort from the plantation. But as I say, we've only just started our journey. And that's why I guess I was a little concerned that Rod's already concluded that we're getting too much, you know, we're going to overshoot with the plantation. Well, he knows more than I do then, because I think we've got some early signals of good plantation coming next year. We've also got some policy that's being developed, which I think is going to constrain plantation forestry. We've got the rules around the ETS being amended, and we've got the permanent forestry category rules coming, as you heard from Minister Shaw. So I think it's very early days to be concluding we can relax, we've cracked it with plantation forestry. I don't think we've got any room at all to to relax in any of these areas, because, as TK said, this is a climate change issue. This isn't just about getting natives. This is how are we going to address climate change within the time frames we've got. If we had all the time in the world, that would be great, but we don't. So I just also want to draw attention here to a couple of earlier attempts at assessing what we need to do. So GLOBE New Zealand, I don't know if people remember GLOBE, the Global Legislators Organisation for a Balanced Environment. Quite a mouthful, isn't it? We had one of those. I think we may still have. James Shaw was certainly one of 35 MPs across the political spectrum who commissioned Vivid Economics from London to do an assessment. And essentially, they came to the conclusion that we can get there, but only if we have significant land change. And their estimate of the kind of planting we needed just in plantation was 30 to 40,000 hectares. Now, 6 years later, we'd actually gone backwards by 20,000 hectares. So people do need to remember that, you know, over the last decade or so, New Zealand was in that unenviable category of actually losing forest. We were one of the countries in the world that was a deforester. And so that meant that that target obviously had to be increased to catch up. 2018, the Productivity Commission had a look as well, and they concluded 2.8 million. That's a bigger number, much bigger number, at an average of 87,500. So my point here is, what Rod Carr and his team have come up with is to put more emphasis on gross emissions reduction, and quite rightly. But that means that that does put the pressure on and the expectation that we have to do something about that. And so this more conservative estimate that they have come out with for plantation forestry does rely on us doing our bit on gross emissions. The other thing that Rod's done, which the previous reports didn't do, was to bring out the role of native forestry, not just in the short term, but beyond 2050 as well. I just also want to draw attention to a couple of things on plantation forestry. We actually have a reasonably decent-sized Indigenous estate within the plantation estate. So we've done a little survey of our own membership. You can extrapolate that to the national estate and you end up with about 235,000 hectares in reserves, wetlands, covenants, special natural areas, etc., significant natural areas, etc. So that's a decent sized reserve. And the other thing I would say with it is it's a requirement of FSC or PFC to have a minimum of 10%, and most of the membership's in that category. But here's the trick. Because you've got, and this is to TK's point about financing, because you've got the money, you've got a productive estate there, you can look after that stuff much better than I would say DOC can with the national estate. And that's no reflection on DOC, that's a reflection on resources. It's not a biological desert. There is nobody claiming that plantation forestry delivers the biodiversity that a native forest does. That's not the claim. But again, as TK said, where are we planting? We're planting onto pasture. And let me tell you, if you're prepared to look at the scientific literature, the level of biodiversity in pine forests is actually quite staggering. So I'm not going to go through the detail there, but I think you can understand the frustration of those in the plantation industry when we do get this, oh, it's a monoculture and it's a biological desert. It's frustrating. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Forest Accord. Back in 1991, the environmental groups, key environmental groups in this country got together with the forest industry. There's a lot of great words in there, but essentially the message is the environmental groups recognise the role that plantation forestry can play, particularly in terms of taking the pressure off the native forest, because that's where our timber is going to come from. But equally, the plantation forestry undertook that they would not be planting into native. So that's not what we do under the Forest Accord. There's also a climate change accord that was signed more recently. That was 2007. I think it's actually quite prophetic if you look at some of the wording and think how long ago those groups got together and thrashed that out. One excerpt from that: policies should promote the retention and expansion of Indigenous forests and the replanting and expansion of plantation forests and associated use of wood products to recognise the positive climate change benefits. Seemed like a good thing to me. So, again, focusing on the positives, what can we do? Penny Nelson talked about making sure that we get the right people coming together to work together, and I think that really is important. Te Ura Rakau are going to have an advisory service. The Minister talked about the first office going up into Whangarei. There's a lot of money that's come in, more recent, like in the recent budget, that can be tapped into. And but I think it's really important that we make sure that we have these groups lined up. Now, Minister Nash talked about the work that's already going on with Ngāpuatane and working with iwi. So I think it's really important that groups like Tāne's and Pure Advantage and Te Urarako Advisory Service work with those that have got the connections, iwi, federated farmers, farm forestry. And we've got a consistent message that these people do need support. And remember, this is not public land. We are trying to convince people to develop native on their own land. So they need a story. The costs is an issue, but it's resolvable. I mean, you only have to look at the plantation forestry, the development of the Mānuka industry, some of the things, containerised seedlings, some of the revolutions that have gone on, and we're only at the start, but there is ability to bring these costs down, certainly in terms of nursery costs, and I think Jason Wilson's probably going to talk more about that. We can achieve some economies of scale. Should we have a differential rate of carbon for natives? I know that's been raised. For the same reasons that Rod Carr had reservations about Hiwaka Ekanoa over-recognising carbon, I think that could be a challenge if we went down that track, and I think a far better one is the biodiversity credits. I thought this was going to be something revolutionary I could put up, but everybody's talked about it already. But all I can do is be an echo chamber for those that have gone before. I think there's a fantastic opportunity here, and this would play to the very strength of native forestry. The one thing that native forestry has that nothing else has, that nothing else can deliver on the same scale. So I think we do need to make progress on that one. The other area is additionality, and I know that there is work that is now going on by Te Urarako to look at recognising carbon, additional carbon within existing forests. So pre-1990, this is again legitimate under the international rules. We haven't put too much effort into it before, but it's been something that has been recognised since about 2011. So we can get on and do this. This will then recognise. You can imagine what sort of incentive that would give for pest control, etc. If you can increase the biomass and increase the resilience of the forests that we've got, doesn't add to new forests, but I think we'd all agree it's something that we do want to see. And finally, I would urge that we think beyond just getting trees in the ground. There's a real opportunity here to develop an industry beyond just another dock estate. And as I said, this is going to be private land. So Professor David Norton there came up with a really good quote, which certainly resonates with me. And I know the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the UN FAO have done various estimates of what sort of fibre demand we're going to need or face by the year 2050, and it's somewhere between 3- and 4-fold. Now we talk about, we're going to need food. Yeah, we are. Actually, we can feed everybody in the world with the amount of food that we're already producing. Food production's not the issue. Food distribution and food wastage is an issue. But food fibre is going to be a problem, and it's going to be a big problem. And WWF, their advice was that this needed to be met in 2 ways. One, from plantation forestry, and you can see the statistics down the bottom there about how little area you actually need to produce a reasonably large percentage of your supply. So for New Zealand, nearly all of our production is coming from 7% of the area, and it's solely in the plantation forestry. But even at a global scale, similar area, 7%, and half of the world's production is coming from there. So that was one area. But the other thing they said was, and production from natural forest. So we're not talking about pristine old-growth forest here, but there is the ability here, I think, to enhance supply from both. And so let's try and break down this artificial separation between the two estates, because New Zealand is kind of unique in the world. Most other places in the world, they do harvest on a sustainable basis, well, and on an unsustainable basis from their native forests. We're quite unique in the world in having this separation. So that's probably enough from me, I think. I would just finish with, may your seeds always fall on fertile ground.